The radio told me there were people inside the restricted zone before anyone had reported them missing. And that should have been impossible, because the frequency the call came through on had been dead for almost a decade. I was doing routine perimeter checks on the eastern boundary of the preserve that night. Nothing unusual. Just logging gate locks and checking the fence line after a storm had rolled through earlier in the afternoon, when my truck radio burst with a blast of static so sharp it made me flinch. Then, a man's voice came through, clipped and urgent, like he was already mid-conversation. 3 subjects passed the Quarry fence. Repeat, 3 inside the basin. 1 may be injured. Then the line went dead. I remember looking down at the console because the display wasn't showing our active dispatch band. It was showing channel 7, an old maintenance search frequency we stopped using years earlier when the repeater tower was replaced. Nobody in current operations even had access to it anymore, not unless they were carrying some ancient surplus handheld. At first I thought maybe it was interference. We got weird overlap in bad weather sometimes. But then I checked the perimeter road ahead and saw headlights where there absolutely should not have been headlights, down past the secondary chain gate that blocks public access to the old Quarry road. Someone had driven around it. I radioed dispatch on primary, reported possible trespassers in the restricted basin, and they told me no one else had called it in, no other units in the area, no maintenance crews scheduled. I gave my position marker, logged the unauthorized vehicle sighting, and headed down the service road. The restricted area wasn't some military site or anything dramatic like that. It was an abandoned limestone quarry the county had bought years back after a collapse killed 2 contractors. The entire basin had unstable walls, sinkholes, and old blasting tunnels that were never fully mapped. We kept it fenced off because people were idiots and liked to sneak in for photos or to party. Incidents like this happen more often than people think. Someone sees a no entry sign and assumes it's there for liability, not because the ground might literally open beneath them. About halfway down the road I found the vehicle, a white Jeep Wrangler, parked crooked in the mud near the broken chain gate, driver's side door hanging open, music still playing low from the speakers. No one inside. Engine warm. There were 3 backpacks tossed in the rear seat and a drone case in the cargo area, which told me immediately what kind of people I was dealing with. Urban explorer types. Probably trying to get footage in the quarry after dark. I called the plate, into dispatch, then grabbed my flashlight, trauma kit, and spare handheld. The basin trail was steep and washed out from rain, and even in daylight it wasn't safe if you didn't know where to step. At the first overlook I killed my light and listened. For a few seconds I heard nothing but runoff dripping down rock, then voices, distant, echoing weirdly off the quarry walls. Young voices. Laughing at first, then one of them shouting something I couldn't make out. I called out, identifying myself, and got no answer, just movement deeper below. So I started down. The quarry floor was this wide-open bowl of mud, standing water, and collapsed machinery foundations, with old rusted conveyor frames sticking up like skeletons. The storm had turned the whole place slick. I found their tracks immediately. 3 sets of fresh boot prints leading past the warning barriers toward the old blasting tunnels on the north wall. That made my stomach drop, because those tunnels were the reason the basin was fully restricted. Half of them had caved in over the years, and the remaining sections were unstable enough that we didn't even send staff inside. Then my radio crackled again. Same dead frequency, same voice. They went into tunnel 3. Roof compromised. Move. I stopped dead in the mud. I'm not proud of that, but I did. Just stood there staring at the speaker grow. The transmission hadn't come through. Dispatch. It bypassed the active channel entirely, straight onto the dead one. I switched frequencies manually, checked every band. Nothing. Silence. Maybe I was overthinking it, but the voice sounded familiar, in that weird way where you can't place someone immediately. Older guy, rough voice, professional tone. I radioed dispatch and asked if anyone was patching through alternate channels. They said no. Then they asked why I sounded winded. I didn't explain because it sounded insane. I just told them I had visual on tracks entering Tunnel 3 and was proceeding. The entrance to Tunnel 3 had been half sealed with concrete barriers after a partial collapse in 2016, but whoever went in had squeezed through a gap where erosion had widened aside. I found one of the trespassers about 20 feet inside, sitting against the wall with blood running down his face and his ankle twisted sideways under him. Kid couldn't have been older than 19. He was pale and shaking, phone flashlight still in his hand. The first thing he said when he saw me was, "He told us not to come in here." I assumed he meant one of his friends. Then I noticed he kept looking past me, deeper into the tunnel. I asked where the others were. He pointed farther inside and said they'd gone after the guy in the ranger jacket because they thought he was leading them out. I remember every part of that sentence, because none of it made sense. There was no other ranger in that basin. Dispatch confirmed that twice. I stabilized his ankle enough to keep him still and called for SAR support.
Whoa, last 1 minute
Was 4. Then I had to make a decision I hated, leave him there temporarily while I followed the tunnel for the other two, because if they were deeper in a compromised mind system chasing some unknown person, waiting could get them killed. The tunnel narrowed fast, dripping water from crack supports overhead. About 50 yards in, I started seeing fresh handprints in the dust along the walls. One set low and smeared like someone had slipped, then drag marks. Then I heard screaming. I ran the rest of the way and found the second trespasser pinned under a slab of fallen limestone, maybe the size of a dining table. His friend was kneeling beside him, trying desperately to pull debris away with bare hands. Both were filthy and hysterical. They kept talking over each other, saying the ranger had gone ahead around the bend, that he'd been yelling for them to hurry because the tunnel was collapsing, that they'd followed him and then the ceiling came down behind him. There was no bend. The tunnel ended 20 feet ahead in a collapsed choke point of rock and rebar. No side passages, no branch, no place for another person to go. I checked anyway, climbing over debris with my flashlight, shaking more than I want to admit, but the end was solid collapse. Nobody there, no footprints beyond theirs, nothing. We spent the next hour getting county rescue in and extracting the injured. One kid had a shattered ankle, the other a crushed pelvis and internal bleeding. Both survived, barely. The third, kid with a head wound, kept repeating that a ranger with an old silver flashlight had found them in the basin before I arrived and warned them to stay out of the tunnels. Said the man looked wrong for a ranger, like his uniform was older, faded differently. They thought he was trying to scare them, so they ignored him and went deeper. Then when the first collapse happened behind them, and they panicked, he reappeared farther inside, shouting that he knew another way out and to follow him. That was when the second collapse pinned their friend. I wrote it all down because that's procedure, even when witness statements sound confused. Trauma does strange things to memory. But after the rescue wrapped and the sheriff took over the trespass investigation, I went back through old incident reports because the voice on the radio was still bothering me. And eventually, I found why it sounded familiar. In 2014, before my time there, a ranger named Thomas Keene had died responding to trespassers in that same quarry after a tunnel collapse. His body was recovered near Tunnel 3. His final recorded transmission to dispatch, preserved in the report file, was, 3 subjects passed the quarry fence, 1 may be injured. Word for word what I'd heard on the dead channel. Exact wording, same cadence even. I actually had to sit down when I read that because I felt this pressure in my chest like I couldn't get enough air. There had to be an explanation. Somebody replaying archive transmissions as a prank. Radio bleed from some old recording. Corrupt memory making me connect things after the fact. I know how that sounds. I'm aware. But then dispatch called me into the communications room because the overnight system audit had flagged something strange. The first transmission I'd reported hearing, the warning about trespassers in the basin, had not only been partially captured by the old archive logger, it had been timestamped at 8:11 p.m., my patrol GPS, gate check log, and dash cam all put me still 2 miles north of the quarry at 8:11. I didn't even see the illegal headlights until 8:19. which meant, according to the system, that the warning came 8 minutes before the trespassers entered the basin. That part never made it into any official summary because the communications supervisor marked it as probable server desync during the storm. Reasonable explanation. Maybe correct, but there were two more things that never sat right with me. First, one of the rescued kids later insisted the ranger who spoke to them in the tunnel knew one of their names, even though none of them had introduced themselves, and their IDs were still locked in the Jeep. Second, while maintenance crews resealed Tunnel 3 the following week, they found an old aluminum flashlight lodged under debris near the collapse point, dented, corroded, long dead. The kind of department-issued maglite we stopped carrying years ago. Inventory stamp on the handle matched equipment issued to Thomas Keene in 2014 and never recovered after the accident. Officially, it was assumed the collapse had shifted debris and exposed something buried deeper in the tunnel. That makes sense. It probably is what happened. But I still think about the way those kids described him, all three of them separately, before any of them knew who Keene was. And I think about that first radio call every time I do storm patrol near the basin, and static hits the truck speakers just right. Because the thing that bothers me most isn't that I heard a dead man's voice on a dead frequency. It's that whoever or whatever warned me about those trespassers knew they were inside the restricted area before they had even broken the fence.